we'll try to cut a little bit. Okay, so we're starting on Mem Hey Omid Beis, about a dozen or so lines from the top. The second word in Itmer Rav Levi. We're going to discuss machlokes between Rav and Levi. So let me just say that when we finished the sugya last week, ultimately the question that we have been discussing for several weeks now is the kinyan that Zohov or Kesef, but primarily Zohov, we make with Zohov because Zohov is a metaltalin. It is a product, a produce, as opposed to money, because we've determined with all kinds of proofs that money doesn't fluctuate, but you can't make a kinyan through the money, so that when there is a transaction between money and a metaltalin, a product, produce, fruit, whatever it was, then the kinyan has to come from the product, not from the money. The money is agav. In other words, the money sort of flows along after the fact when you make the kinyan on the product, but money itself can't make the kinyan. Now the Gemara is going to at least give us a presentation to show us that maybe money can make the kinyan. Everything we've said till now is that money is sort of carried along by the kinyan of the actual product. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute, we're going to make a showing that money can make the kinyan. Everything that we've said notwithstanding. So let's understand how that's going to come to pass. Okay, says the Gemara, and this is the beginning of a discussion between Itmer and Rav Levi. Itmer Rav Levi, Chad Oma Matbea Nasa Chalipin, Chad Oma Ein Matbea Nasa Chalipin. One Mar again doesn't articulate who says that a coin, Matbea, money, can make Chalipin, and one says not. But what is Chalipin? Chalipin is technically it's called an exchange. But what does it mean to make an exchange? So we know the classic term barter, right? What is barter? Barter means I'm going to give you an object and you're going to give me an object. No money transacts, but it's going to be a chayfetz for a chayfetz. So, I mean, the barter economy is huge, right? Because people do that all the time. But that exchange is what's called chalipin. That's chalipin. I give you an item, and you give me an item of approximate worth, right? Or we adjust it with one or two items, and everybody goes home happy, and there's no money exchanged. That's chalipin. There's another example of chalipin, which we all know from our practice, and that is what's called kinyan sudar, right? For instance, Erev Pesach, you go to the rabbi and you want to sell your chametz. What does it mean to sell your chametz? You say to the rabbi and he gives you a handkerchief, right? And there's a discussion, by the way, who gives the handkerchief, okay? Does the person who is making, in other words, does the person who's getting the product give the handkerchief, which in most cases, that's what it is, or does the other person? But for our purposes, it doesn't matter. So what is the chalipin there? You want to sell your chametz to a non-Jew through a kinyan sudar where the rabbi is acting as your exchange agent. That's chalipin, even though it's a one-sided thing because he's not giving you back consideration other than the handkerchief, but it's that's why it has to be worth something. It can't be just a throwaway. There has to be shavapruta. There has to be a value to that item. So there is a value to the handkerchief. But anyway, that's also chalipin. So a couple of examples of chalipin that we've given. Says the Gemara that in this machlokes between Rav and Levi, one says matbea nasa chalipin, that a coin can be used for chalipin, and one says not. What's the example? The example is that I'm going to give you an item, and we're going to use, instead of a sudar, instead of a handkerchief, we're going to use a coin. The coin will be the exchange agent. So what do we see from this? We see from this, at least on the surface, that a coin can act as and he doesn't differentiate gold or silver. It says matbeya, just a coin. It could be maybe even a copper coin. A coin can be used as the exchange agent, which, it's according to the mandama that you can do it, means that the coin can transact. Here we've been saying all along that a coin cannot make a kinyan. You can't use the coin for a kinyan. It has to be the product, has to be what you make the actual meshicha, let's say, or hakbah, whatever you do on that item, and therefore, and the coin and the money is a tag along, right? It's memela. No, wait a minute. You see, according to that Manda Omar, matbeya nasa chalipin, that a coin can act as chalipin. So, okay, so on the surface, that's the machlokes. But we have to go into it and understand. But the point is that in this machlokes, there is one Manda Omar who's saying that a coin can be used for exchange, and it can be the other side of the transaction, which heretofore we have said basically it can't be. It has to be the product that has to be always the instrument for making the kinyan. And here we see you can make the kinyan on a coin. And again, no differentiation between gold and silver. All right, so again, we're going to go much further into this, but that's the machlokes between Rav and Levi, whether you can make chalipin or not on a coin. Amar Rav Papa. So now we're going to analyze. Says Rav Papa, Ma tama the mandama ema pe nasa chalipin. According, the mandama who says it's chalipin, it's very simple. It's chalipin. Why? Because a coin can be used as an exchange, and therefore, once you transact with the coin, then you have a kinyan. You have a kinyan with the coin, no problem. What about the one who says not? That's where we require the analysis. What is Rav Papa going to come to tell us that is not something that we understand? So, Rav Papa, ma tamanamana emin nasa chalipin mishum de date artsurta. So he gives an interesting analysis. Why is the coin not used for chalipin? Because let's analyze what a coin is. Take a silver dollar, our silver dollar. Okay, whether it has silver or silver with an alloy, doesn't matter. A silver dollar has content of value. The coin itself, let's say it's silver. Let's say it's all silver for our discussion. So it's all silver, and that has value. Says that Rav Papa, no, the coin, the inherent value in the coin of its silver is not relevant. What's relevant is tzurta. Tzurta is the appearance. What's on the coin? On the coin is stamped an official $1, right? Silver dollar, whatever, I forget whose picture is on it. There's a picture of some figure, of some important figure. And then there is the fact that it's worth $1. It says $1. So that surta, says the Gemara, is, again, in those times, and again, practically speaking today too, what makes that silver dollar worth $1? Is it the value of the coin? No. I mean, first of all, no one even pays attention to whether it's silver or some other combination metal. But that's not what makes it $1. What makes it $1 is the fact that it's stamped on it $1. So the government has now made a pronouncement that this piece of metal is worth $1. Says the Gemara, you know why a matbeya you can't use chalipin? Because the date atsurta, a person is focused on the tsurta, on the picture, on the form. Vitsurta avida de batla. And what happens? Let's just say that one day the government comes back and says, you know what? That silver dollar that we processed, no more. we're recalling it. It's not going to be worth $1 anymore. If you try to transact with it, you will get nothing. In other words, it's telling the olam, forget about it. We're going to issue new money, and that surta, that form that says $1 on the coin is now worthless. But wait a minute. Let's go back, and we're going to look at Rashi. Rashi will explain to it. What's the source of chalipin? Do we remember what the source of chalipin? Where does chalipin come from? If you remember, we read in Megillas Rus, the Sholach Nala, that he gave a shoe. The shoe is the symbol of chalipin. What is a shoe? A shoe is a article of, it's a solid article, right? And it has a value to it. And you can't make adjustments. You can't say, today the shoe is worth X, and tomorrow the shoe is worth Y. It's a solid physical object. So the Torah picks an object that won't fluctuate. A shoe is a shoe is a shoe. That's it. So now the Gemara is telling us that a coin can't equate to a shoe, because whereas a shoe is a whole solid object, a coin is subject to the whims of whoever issued it. If the government issues a coin and says this coin, this silver dollar is worth $1, fine, but tomorrow may not be worth $1. The shoe, you can't undo its value, because it's not because someone else pronounced it. It's because the Gemara picked an object that we know is a solid object that isn't going anywhere. So we're going to look at Rashi, but that's the seichel behind it. So therefore, according to the Madam who says you can't make chalipin, you know why you can't make chalipin? Because it doesn't have the reliability of a shoe. It isn't a shoe. You can't equate it to something that has intrinsic value that can't be adjusted. Because a coin can be adjusted because of the tsurta, therefore you can't use it for chalipin, for exchange, because chalipin has to be a solid item. Okay. Now, let's look at Rashi, because Rashi will articulate what we're trying to say as to why, according to this Manda Omar, you can't use it for chalipin. Okay, so Rashi says, Matbea nasa chalipin, up near the 10 or so lines from the narrow lines. Matbea nasa chalipin, says Rashi, abol lechalif matbea b'dava acher. If someone comes to exchange in matbea, a coin, for something else, shalobator is make a memker, not in the course of commerce where it's buying and selling. Elevator is kinyan, which we've talked about now. You make a kinyan kederach shekonim besuder, just like you coin a besuder, like we talked about chometz shahakoinen osuder lamachne. The koine, the buyer. Okay, in this case it's the buyer. It can be the seller too, but Rashi said shahakoinen osuder lamachne. The kone, the buyer, is giving the suder, the handkerchief, to the makne, who makne lo hakarka oham taltalan, and the makne is giving him the land or the object of the exchange. B'mashicha, in other words, he makes a kinyan. Shuhu moshe chasuder, because he makes a mashicha. What do we do with the suder? We lift it, right? When you give it to the rabbi, he says lift it up. You make a hagbal. Kidiksiv, it says, and this is where we learned it from Rus, Sholaf ish nalo v'nosu, that a person took out his shoe and he gave it to his friend, in other words, to the other person, af matbeya, so to matbeya, sha'af al pisha sheninu nosu mos, below moshe chaimenu peiros, even though we've learned, if a person gives someone else money and he doesn't make a mashicha, yochalach zebo, right? If you didn't make the Mashicha on the Paris, there's no kinyan. So if he wanted to say, hey, I want to get out of the transaction, you're allowed to, because you haven't made the kinyan yet. Hanamili, that's only kinyan shenastu b'Torah's damin, kederach mekach hamemker, which is what we've been learning till now, that when you give the money in the exchange, the person takes the payers, right? In this case, we said zov was payers, zov was produce. So but the zov is what you have to make the mashicha on, and as long as you don't make the mashicha on the zov, you can undo the transaction. But if you give it as a chalipin, not as a mekach or memker, Given shemoshach zeh es hamaos, since he made a meshicha on the money, nikna lo hachayt shelo b'kol mokum shehu. So as long as you made a meshicha on the money, it's good. So what do we see from here? We see from here that according to the Manda Omer, who says that a matbeya nasa chalipin, that money makes the exchange. You don't even have to have touched the item. Let's say you were selling the money for a dresser or for a whatever. I mean, a carpet. All right, I'm looking at a carpet. So you're going to buy a carpet, and you're going to give it a chalipin in exchange. The guy never touched the carpet. The minute you make a meshicha on the money, the exchange takes place. Now, so we see that money can be used in the exchange, which is what the machlokes, that's what we said at the outset. We're going to give an example where money can make the exchange, not just the produce. So according to the Manda Omer that you're allowed to use the money for an exchange, here's the example. Because it's not like a transaction where you're buying something, right? Here, you're making the exchange through the coin. Now, just to be certain, this is also a case of where you're paying money for that carpet. It isn't just the coin that's making the exchange. There is money behind this, but the money is secondary to the fact that you're using a coin for the exchange. And once he picks up the coin, the exchange happens, even though he hasn't paid him the money, and even though the other fellow hasn't yet moved the carpet. So that's the raya to our question here, that money can be used as an exchange mechanism, according to the Manda Omer, who says matbeya nasa chalipin. Now, says Rashi, ein matbeya nasa chalipin. What about the other Manda Omer? Is kiddam mafarish Rav Papa. Like Rav Papa says, my time of the Manda Omer. What's the reason according to that Manda Omer says you can't do it? Is later Rav Nachman. Now, you can't say that the reason why it's not valid is because of Rav Nachman. Now, Rav Nachman, we're gonna learn about Rav Nachman later on in the Gemara in a couple of lots. The Omer Lekaman Mem Zayin and Daf Mem Zayin, which we're gonna learn, that Rav Nachman makes the following pronouncement: Ein konen ella bekli. You could only make a kinyan with a keli, with an actual object, the nalo ksiv, right? Because the pasuk in Rus says shalof ish nalo. So, so Rav Nachman is let's call him a strict constructionist, and he says the Torah says nalo, it has to be nalo. So a matbeya doesn't qualify as an object. It's a matbeya, it's not an object. So Rav Nachman makes that pronouncement later on. So Rashi wants to say that's not the reason why in our Gemara it doesn't work, because he's not hanging his hat on what Rav Nachman says. Why? Because the imkain, if he was hanging his hat on what Nachman says, that it says shalafish nalo, and therefore it has to be a coin, it can't be a coin. Why does because if he's going to hang his hat on Rav Nachman, then why does he just say a matbeya? Any object that is not a kli, forget about matbeya, anything else that's not a kli can't be used. In other words, Rav Nachman is saying it has to be a kli and nothing else. So why pick money? If he was going to hold Rav Nachman, he could pick anything. So this is Rashi's way of saying that it's not because of Rav Nachman that Rav Papa is saying that the matbeya is not valid, right? That any metaltalin, any movable object can be used as chalipin, liknos es shekenegdo, to buy what it is being exchanged for. And the only exception is a coin. So what Rashi is really saying is that in Rav Papa's interpretation of the individual, of whoever it is, Rav and Levi, who says, it isn't because of Rav Nachman's edict. who says that it has to be nalo, a kli, and nothing else. It's a whole separate other thing, and therefore only a matbeya is excluded. Any other item which is not a kli may be used for chalipin under this scenario, right? I mean, it's a little confusing, but that's what the Gemara is telling us. So according to this manda, and the reason why we said is because it's surta, because of the fact that he's relying on the picture, in other words, the symbol, the dollar that the government says it's worth, and its surta is not reliable. The government can pull that any day. So therefore, it can't be used for halipin because it isn't a genuine article, as a shoe would be. Okay, so that's the machlokes now between Rav and Levi. So according to one manda Omar, a matbeya can be used, and therefore we see that a coin can make a kinyan, and according to the other manda Omar, it can't be. All right, so that's now the machlokes, but at least we see that there is that possibility that it can be used as a king. Okay,
Rabbi, I'm not fully understanding. So
okay, yeah.
While a coin's value may fluctuate, a shoe or a handkerchief or any other object is an object, but it can fluctuate as well in value. So we're not talking about the equivalence of value. We're talking about it being an object, right? So a
Right.
coin is an object. It is an object that has a value that may differ. When silver was originally adopted, presumably, I mean, we see in the Torah that they measured out, silver that was equivalent to what the value was. And yes, the value can change, but that's true for everything else. But a coin is an object. So I'm trying to understand, is it the value that matters, or is because you're using the coin, or you're using coinage or the equivalency to exchange, that you can't use that again as the source for the kinyan?
Okay, so according to this Manda Omar, Michael, the coin has value only because the government gave it value and it said it's worth $1. If the government pulls that value, the government says, I no longer consider this coin that says $1 on it to have any value whatsoever, then all of a sudden that coin becomes useless. So
But not true. The government may not say it, but obviously it can be melted down and used in another fashion, so it has value. It doesn't have the equivalent value that the government stamped on it, but it still has value.
Okay, so we're taking the position for our discussion that the coin itself has no inherent value. Forget about a silver dollar. Take a penny. A penny is the lowest form of valuation of a coin. And we're saying that if you took a pruta then and made a kinyan with it, because the government said it has this worth, now you can make a kinyan. Says this Manda Amar, if the government said no longer does a pruta have any value, and you have this item of metal, forget about a silver, you have an item, what are you going to do with it? Who is going to take a copper disc, that a small copper disc, which may even not have copper in it, it may have some other alloy, and have any value? Inherently, it won't have value. I know you're saying, but you can melt it down and do something with it. But from the Gemara standpoint, that valuation is not relevant. It's relevant.
So the value matters. But if you pick up a shoe that is torn, that has no sole, for example, what value does that have? It's an object.
No, you may be right. A shoe that is not whole, that isn't, again, when the Torah says nalo, it's referring to a shoe that a person wears and takes it off. Literally, it's a good shoe, takes it off and makes the kinyan. So we're not comparing it to a tattered shoe, which, you're right, might be the equivalent of a useless penny. We're talking about a shoe, which is a solid object, and it's obviously useful because it's whole. Remember, it has a value because it can be used as a whole item. So we're not talking about a torn, shoe that can't be used. So that's the object that the Torah holds up as being a kli that inherently has value and therefore can be used. It's a whole item and therefore can be used. And Rashi uses the term sholem, that it's whole. So a nalo is sholem, it's whole, and therefore it can be used. An item.
The value is it can be used, and the idea of the coin. So it has to have value, and value is not necessarily a monetary value, but that it can be used. And the argument is that in the case of kesef, or if the value is taken away,
it doesn't have
value anymore.
Correct. That's exactly what the Gemara is saying, is that in and of itself, it would have no value, but for the fact that the government said, this is worth $1. So therefore, according to this man Omar, it's too sketchy. It doesn't fit the mode of what we use for chalipin. We use for chalipin a shoe which is whole and which isn't going anywhere. It's a whole good shoe. Anything that looks and feels like a good whole shoe can be used for chalipin. According to him, money is not that object that is comparable to a shoe because of tsurta, because the whole value is based on the government saying this is worth $1.
But any other
penny,
object
whatever it is,
be used.
and if you take that away, you have nothing else left. That's how the Gemara interprets this mandam. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
At least now we see that there was a machlokes, and yes, there was one owner who says no, but there's one owner who says yes. And now we understand the two sides as to why it is and it isn't. Okay, now.
Rabbi, yeah. Talking about a shoe could be worth more than gold. If you take a Michael Jordan, whatever they are, those sneakers,
right,
they're worth more than an ounce of gold.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
But you could say that just because it's not a means to do, somebody always wants something and it can always be used.
Right. But we're not even concerned about the aura of a shoe that might have value because, like you're saying, it's a famous person shoe or it's equivalent to something like that. The shoe itself, stripped away of any accoutrement, of any special value, has a value. Just the shoe itself. Michael Jordan, it could be this guy, it could be that guy. The shoe has the value. So that's why the Torah says that if you take a shoe is a symbol of something that is inherently valuable. You can't take the value away. You can enhance the value by putting an autograph on it, okay, fine. But the shoe itself has value. Whereas a coin, that's nebulous. That value is only there because someone else says, oh, this particular coin has value. Once the coin the value is pulled, then it's not even like a shoe anymore because it isn't a whole item. Now take a look at the next Rashi, Mishum de Data Atsurta, because why according to this Manda Amar? No, because his whole mindset is on the Tsurta. Data shel makne es achefetz, the das, the intention of the person who is makne the chaypetz, the notl hamadbeya b'chalipin, and he uses it for chalipin. Ein esomech el ala tzura shabo. He is only focused, says Rashi, on the tzura, the picture, the value. She'ein hamadbeya choshuv. He's saying that the matbeya, the coin, has no chashivas, it has no value. Ela al yidei tzura shabo, only because of its imprint. V'tzurta avida de batla. And the imprint can be being mevatel. Why? Shahamelech posla, because the king, in other words, in those days when they've been looking at it, they say the king makes it null, but goes in the tzura acheres, and he says, you know what? We're gonna print a different coin that has. Interesting enough, they're talking there about. The picture that was on the coin at that time, the Melech wanted to honor, let's say, a famous individual. Now, in our society today, we know that individuals of merit from previous generations have been totally vitiated, right? In other words, the culture says so-and-so is possible, so therefore he can no longer be represented. We see that today, mamish, in our life, is that famous Americans or famous world leaders have been canceled out, no longer. So there, the Gemara is literally telling us that the Melech is canceling the surah of that particular individual and says, I no longer want that person. Let's say George Washington on the bill, on the dollar bill. Okay, George Washington is possible, and now we have to use someone else's the bill. So that's Pshat Hamelach Posla, the Gozer, the Tzur, Tzura Acheres. So now there's someone else going to be on that silver coin who's going to be the Tzura. Therefore, it's not reliable. This is the key. It is like something that isn't mesuyim b'shalem. It isn't filled. It isn't complete and whole. And the Gemara later is going to explain to us that that a thing that is not mesuyim is not valid because it's not like a no'al. So, Michael, to your point about a shoe is a shoe. I mean, you can always rely on the shoe. And we're talking about a whole shoe, not a tattered shoe. So, because he picked a shoe, that means it has to be something equivalent to the shoe that can't be arbitrarily wiped out. A coin can be arbitrarily wiped out. If the king says, I don't like the person who's on the coin, I'm canceling him out and I'm putting a new coin with a new individual on it. Therefore, the Manda Omer who says you can't use it for chalipin is saying it's not reliable. It's not shalem. Therefore, you can't use it for chalipin because chalipin is a shoe, and the definition of a shoe is it's whole, it's reliable, it's solid. Okay, so that's the Gemara's interpretation for the Manda Omar, who says that you cannot use a coin for chalipin. Okay, nevertheless, there is a Manda Omar who says you can. All right, so now that we have this discussion between Levi and Rav, says the Gemara, wait a minute, not so fast. Even according to the Manda Omar, who says you can't use it for chalipin, that's not the case. So the Gemara is not going to bring a raya to the Manda Omar who says you can use it for chalipin. Okay, so now we're getting a little deeper in the weeds that even the Manda Omar who says you can't has to change his mind. Okay, Tanan, we learned Azov Koines HaKesef that, right, our Mishnah, Azov Koines HaKesef, that the Zov is Koines HaKesef. Now, till now, we've been interpreting it as money, and we said that Zov is not money there, and money can't be used for Kinyan. Therefore, Azov, therefore, the proof again. That was the proof is that you can't use the kesef to the Kinyan. The Kinyan only can be in the product, right? The Gemara, my lava chalipin. How do you know that our Mishnah is not talking about chalipin? So the Gemara inherently is asking the question. We've been assuming until now that when we read Hazov Koines HaKesef, we're talking about Damim. How do you know? Maybe our Gemara is talking about chalipin, and therefore the coin, the silver coin, the kesef, it can act as an agent for Kinyan because it's the coin of exchange. It's what you're using for the exchange, for the chalipin. So how do you bring a raya from our Gemara that you can't use a coin? Our very Mishnah is telling us you can use a coin because it's chalipin, right? So again, Hazov Koines HaKesef Ma'ila b'chalipin b'shema mina matbei nasa chalipin, and the raya is that matmeya it can be used for chalipin. So in other words, this Gemara is asking, let's flip the script on the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't have to be talking about damim. The Mishnah can be talking about chalipin. Where does it say otherwise? That's the Gemara. That's the kasha here. How do you know that there is a Manda Omar who says that it can't be because of the tzurta? We have a Beferish Mishnah he wants to say that says it can because Azov kind of sarcastic. Now we're going to focus on the Zov, on the coin, not the fact that there's an argument about whether it's dumbing or not, whether it's a product or not. That's only a product if you consider it to be a sale. But when you consider it to be chalipin, we're not worried about that issue. We're not worried about whether it's a product or not a product. A coin is a coin is a coin, just like Zov is a coin, Kesem is a coin, and you're using the Zov as the mechanism for chalipin, and therefore it's valid. That's the Gemara's kasha. Surrender's kasha, because we have not heretofore said that it can't be chalipin. So that's the Gemara's kasha. It should be a raya from our Mishnah. So it says the Gemara, no, that under no circumstance can you say that in our Mishnah. He says, lo, bedamin, that we are talking about damin. We're not talking about chalipin in our Gemara, in our Mishnah. So it's an odd sort of answer just to say it's talking about damin. How do you know? So the svara is that when a person makes chalipin, he has to say, he has to announce, this is a Kenyan chalipin. That's the svara, that you have to say, I'm making chalipin. Because otherwise, if you saw two people exchanging an item for money, would you know, without anybody saying a word, whether it is a sale or an exchange or chalipin? How do you know? You look at two people, one person has an item, a carpet, the other person has a coin, and you watch the exchange. In your mind, what do you see? Do you see a sale? Or do you see chalipin? Inherently says the Gemara that when you see such a thing, you have to assume it's a sale unless you hear the party say, we're making a Kenyan chalipin. So chalipin has to be something that you have to announce. So the Gemara's answer here is lo b'damin, that without any knowledge of anything, our Mishnah has to be talking about damin because it doesn't say chalipin. Okay? So that's the answer is that chalipin has to be specifically identified. A sale doesn't. So when you see two people exchanging, you have to assume it's a sale, unless you hear them say, oh, this is a Kenyan chalipin. So that's the rule. So the Gemara wants to answer here. You want to tell me that our Mishnah is talking about chalipin. Therefore, it's a proof that what? That a coin can be used as a means of Kenyan, because all you're doing is exchanging the coin. And once the coin is exchanged, then the product, then the other side gets the kesef automatically, and therefore a coin can be used as Kenyan, right? That's what chalipin is all about. No, can't bring a raya from our Mishnah because our Mishnah has to be speaking about damin, about money. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Tuvia? If you're talking about a carpet and there's Persian carpet or something like that, very expensive, and somebody hands you a coin could be a shekel. Now, there's no way that a shekel can pay for a carpet, so it would have to be an exchange.
No. I hear what you're asking, but stop a minute, because the coin is making the Kenyan, and afterwards he's going to pay for the carpet. That carpet could be worth $1,000.
Yeah.
So what he's doing is he's using the coin as chalipin, and then he's going to pay him. He's not going to say that the coin is the be-all and end-all exchange for the carpet. All we want to prove here is that the coin can make the Kenyan. After it makes the Kenyan, sure, he's got to pay him. He's got to pay him what it's really worth, which is $1,000. But the proof is that the deal is already done because the person lifted the coin. That's all the Gemara wants to show.
So he could use a pen or he could use anything, right?
That's correct. But since he's using the coin The Gemara wants to prove that Matbeya, that the coin itself can make the transaction. Because all we've learned in the Gemara till now is a coin can't make a transaction. It has to be a produce, an item, right? In other words, in the Masasheni case, the only way that the kinyan can happen is if the Masasheni is acquired, and then the coin sort of comes along afterwards, the monetary value. Here, the Gemara wants to tell us, no, if you're using the coin as chalipin, as an exchange, then the coin itself can make the kinyan. Yes, of course you have to pay for the carpet. The carpet's worth $1,000. You're going to pay $1,000 after the fact. But once you use the coin for a kinyan, you've already made your point.
Okay, so it's like shaking hands in a deal, sort of
It's
thing.
like shaking hands in a deal, except that the shake hands here is the lifting of the coin.
Okay, all right.
Right. So the coin itself makes the deal, says the Gemara. Okay, so that now you see that a coin can act as a agent of kinyan, and that flies in the face of what we said until now. Till now, we've said money can never be the focal point of the kinyan. It has to be the produce, which Zov is considered produce. So, but in our case, why is Zov produce? Zov is money, and you made the kinyan on the money. Now the deal is done. Sure, you have to finish it by paying, but that's a secondary matter, paying for the carpet. The fact is, it's already a kinyan. You can't retract. How do you know if a deal is done? The only way you know is whether on Api Halacha you're allowed to retract. As long as the deal is not done, the Gemara tells us you're allowed to retract and change your mind. Here, if you lift the coin, that's it. Deal is done. No longer retraction. Now you have to pay him for the $1,000 for the carpet, but the deal is done. So,
Rabbi,
he's telling us that he wants to say no, it's dumbing. Because why? Because you didn't say chalipin. And as long as you don't say chalipin, we have to assume dumbing. Yeah, Michael.
I'm still confused the difference between a sale and an exchange. So you can sell something for money, you can sell it for something else. You can call that kind of a sale an exchange, or you can say that he's actually selling it for money. So when you said that the sale does not need to be done through a kinyan, and it doesn't require a document, so I don't understand how you know that it's a sale versus an exchange. Why is it not that each one of them has to be identified? Same thing with a shomer. I mean, you're watching that, a shomer sachar. You're watching that in, for
okay. It's a fair question, because you can say that when two people come together, each person has integrity, and even though it's not going to be written, I'm going to say to you, Michael, I want to sell you this carpet, and the carpet is $1,000. So you're going to pay me $1,000. I'm taking the carpet. I'm making a kinyan on the carpet. The carpet has now belongs to me. The deal is done. You have to pay me the money. You'll pay it to me now. You'll pay it to me in a week. You're going to pay me the money. Again, you're right. There's nothing written, but we're at least assuming that the two of us have integrity, that we are entering into a deal, that each of us is standing behind what we're promising. You're giving me the carpet, and I'm going to give you the money. So I take the carpet, I make a hakbah, let's say, or meshicha, whatever the case is, and then I'm going to give you the money. So that's our case, right? That's our Gemara, Zov and Kesef. Zov is the carpet, so to speak. And so I take the Zov, I pick up the Zov, now it's mine, and I owe you money for the Zov, for the carpet. Okay, fine. Now we're going to say, wait a minute, there's another way of doing this. It doesn't have to be my Zov, my carpet for your money. It can be my carpet for your kinyan of chalipin. What does that mean? Is that you are going to do an exchange right? So the Gemara introduces this concept of chalipin as opposed to damin, as opposed to a mekach and memkar, a commercial transaction. It's going to be an exchange, except that the exchange will also include money, mind you. There's going to be money in this deal, but the exchange is going to be the kinyan, the lifting of the coin, which in this case is the handkerchief, right? You can use a handkerchief, you can use a coin. So we're using a coin, the coin becomes the chalipin, and then you own the carpet. Now, once you own the carpet because of the chalipin, the deal is done. We still have to make a monetary payment for the carpet, right? I still have to give you the kesef, but that's an adjunct to the exchange because the exchange has already happened. Now, how does the exchange happen? Because you took a coin and you did hagbah, which means that a coin can finalize a transaction where the Gemara has told us till now it cannot finalize a transaction. The produce has to finalize the transaction. In other words, in a domim, in a sale, only the carpet, or in that case, the zav, can make the transaction. In chalipin, no, it doesn't have to be the produce, the product. It can be the coin that actually makes the transaction, and then the deal is done, and he's got to pay the money later. But
So what you're saying is you can't do a sale without with a kinyan. A kinyan is only for an exchange. Am I understanding that right?
But you can only make a transaction when there is a kinyan. The question is, what is the kinyan on? Is it on the chayfetz, on the object, the carpet, or in our Gemara, the zahav, or is it on something else? So till now we've said in a case of a sale, it can only be on the object. It can't be on the money because money cannot be the catalyst for a kinyan. Except in the chalipin, money is the catalyst for a deal. So if money is the catalyst because you're taking that matbeya and you're doing a hagbah, and the deal is done. Once you take it, the other guy hasn't even lifted the carpet, but you have taken the coin and lifted it and made a hagbah. Now the deal is done. He gets the carpet and you get the money, all of which can happen after the fact, but the deal is done through the kesef. And that's the proof in the Gemara.
So explain to me when you sell your chametz. So you make a kinyan, you're selling your chametz.
Right.
You're not exchanging, you're selling it. You make a kinyan with the rabbi to be your agent to sell your chametz.
Right.
There is.
But what you don't see, Michael, what you don't see in that transaction is that there is money going to be exchanged later. The rabbi, the goy who is getting he's being paid for that. So there is a monetary transaction which is out of sight. We don't really talk about it because there is some money being exchanged for that sale.
But does that mean? I mean, I think we all give something to the Rav to for the sale. So does that mean that it's not a valid kinyan unless we give the Rav money to?
No, what you're giving the Rav is that's sort of gravy for him acting as your shaliach. That money that you give to the Rav has nothing to do with the transaction. That's a totally separate thing that you're giving him a token of thanks for handling the transaction. But the transaction itself is the chametz for whatever the rabbi and the goy are going to negotiate, which is out of sight. It doesn't affect us. I mean, we can ask what it is, but it's a separate deal. He's making a deal with the goy, and there will be money. Your money is not that money. That money goes to the Rav for his effort.
So what you're doing is you're transferring ownership of the chametz to the rabbi.
And the rabbi will then negotiate with the non-Jew, who will then, in theory, pay for the chametz. They'll pay for the chametz. The rabbi is going to say to the goy, "I'm giving you $1,000 worth of chametz. You give me $100, whatever it is, right?" And so the goy has to understand. Again, this is why it's something that has to be done with the rabbi and the goy and with an understanding. He's actually paying for the chametz, and then after Pesach he gets his money back, and you get your chametz back. So in other words, he's really, in theory, not in theory, in reality, he can come to your house and take your chametz. He's paid for it. But
So is that an exchange or a sale, Rabbi?
Say?
Is that an exchange or a sale?
That's an exchange. But there is money involved in the exchange after the fact. And in our case too, buying the Persian carpet, there will be money that will be exchanged, but that money is secondary to the kinyan, to the shekel or whatever it is that you've used as the kinyan. And the whole point of our Gemara is not that there is going to be money for the carpet. Okay, fine, there'll be money for the carpet, but you're using a coin to make a kinyan. That's all our Gemara is really trying to prove, is that a coin can be used. We've said until now, since the beginning of this parak, you can't use money for a kinyan. Only an object can be used for a kinyan. All of a sudden, we see, no, money can be used for a kinyan when? By chalipin. All right, so, okay, we're going to stop here because we have to stop. But what the introduction we've made is important because the Gemara is going to go on here and ask kashas and give tirutzim. Yes, you can. No, you can't. But so we have now made a statement. There's a machlokes of between Levi and Rav whether domim, whether money can be used for chalipin. According to one man, it can. According to another man, it cannot. We said why? Because of the tzurta issue. And then we wanted to bring a raya from our Mishnah that it can be chalipin because the Mishnah is silent. It says azov sakesa and doesn't say anything. So the Gemara says no. When it doesn't say anything, it's domin. It's money, not chalipin, because chalipin has to be announced. And that's an important fact that you have to understand, is that when you're making chalipin, you've got to say, I'm making chalipin. Otherwise, it's a monetary transaction. Now, when we go further, the Gemara is going to ask kashas on this, which next week we'll see. The Gemara is going to ask all kinds of kashas back and forth, but at least now we've established the fact that there is such a thing as a monetary transaction with money. And now we've broken the mold, and we're going to figure out whether or not that's valid or not. But again, the Gemara it's a series of questions. But at least up till now, we've asked the question, and l'chayra, you can use money for an exchange. All right, we'll stop here, and we'll pick up next week. But it's a wonderful sugya, and thank you for Michael. You've asked the right questions because it's something you have to internalize and understand to be able to go forward.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk next week.
Thank you.